During my rewatch of High School DxD, I was pleasantly surprised with the series. When I got to season 3, I was a little concerned because of how much it strayed away from the light novel, but I can't lie, for the most part, I still enjoyed the season, even though it was a definite downgrade from how the light novel did it. It still had some great episodes and I was still entertained for most of the season, but that all kind of went downhill as soon as I reached the final arc. I call it the Loki's Curse arc because it's all about a curse that Loki places on Issei and Rias after their fight. This curse goes on to eat at Issei and Rias' insecurities throughout the rest of the season. It's supposed to make Issei's trauma worse, and it made Rias' confidence in her relationship with Issei worse. It ate away at her confidence so much that Loki sent a clone of Issei to sweet talk her, and she fell for it and became mind controlled. The rest of the time is about Issei trying to save her and figure out what is going on with her, and then obviously he eventually does end up saving her and they have a big moment and they kiss. That's a very brief rundown of the Loki's Curse arc, and this whole arc can be summed up with one word: pointless. This arc just isn't that good. It actually ended up being so bad that the author had to create an entire side story basically telling us that this season isn't canon. The original creator hated it, the light novel fans hated it, and I'm not too fond of this arc either. I'll start by talking about the biggest problem people have with the arc. It completely strays away from the light novel. For the most part, season 3 is still able to somewhat follow the light novel. They change a lot and leave a lot of details out, but the overall plot is still the same. But that all changes when you get to the Loki's Curse arc. Everything that happens in this arc is completely made up. There is no Loki's Curse in the light novel. I think the thing that bothers me the most is the fact that they completely cut out the rating game between Rias and Sona from this season just so they could add this arc. It's so frustrating because the rating game with Sona is one of the best volumes I've read so far. It gives us a new perspective on different characters like Sona and Saji, and they're able to make the rating game interesting by restricting the power of the Grimoire team. It's such a good arc, and leaving it out of the anime was one of their biggest fumbles. And it doesn't do anything but ruin the story moving forward. They do this with a lot of things throughout season 3. A lot of things get changed in some way, and all of these changes add up, and we see it negatively impact the rest of the series. In season 4, they constantly bring up the rating game between Sona and Rias, and we have no idea what they're talking about because we didn't see it in the anime. It makes these moments with Issei and Saji feel empty because we missed the bond that they built in that light novel. And of course, it also just leaves us confused because again, we just don't know what they're talking about. They had a whole rating game off screen. They also cut out the first fight with the hero faction, so season 4 has to show it to us in a flashback instead of giving it to us in full. And this kind of just makes the hero faction's appearance and threat seem a lot more random than it actually was in the light novel. They also brush over so many tiny details and it just leaves us with so many questions. Like in season 4 when Issei just randomly pulls out a fire attack that wasn't explained because they decided to skip over the entire training time Issei had with Tanin. They completely neglect to tell us why Issei doesn't ever use his divine dividing power. In the light novel, it's explained that every time he uses it, his lifespan goes down, but that's never told to us in the anime. And it just makes the viewer question why Issei doesn't use one of his most useful powers. They brush over Sona's motivations, so we just don't care about her in season 3 when she's telling them to us. In the light novel, Sona gets laughed at by the higher ups, and it creates a great moment that makes us want to root for her, but that just isn't there in this season. I could go on forever, but I think you get the point. They cut out and they rush through so many important moments and details, and it creates a mess of a season, all because they wanted to be fancy and create their own ending. They could have used these episodes that they used for that final arc to go into detail about the characters and their reasonings, but instead they used the time to create a moment between Issei and Rias. They cut so much material out and everything just ends up feeling rushed, and that's because they're still trying to fit 3 arcs in 12 episodes. If the reason for cutting out volume 5 was because they didn't have enough episodes to adapt it, I would kind of understand. But they cut it out and then they try to give us a new arc to replace it, and it just doesn't work, and of course everything just ends up feeling so rushed. The pacing of this arc is not great, it's too fast, and because of this, some of the most important moments get overlooked and skipped over. The biggest victim of this is the Issei trauma final reveal. This is probably one of my least favorite moments in the anime, but Rias gets kidnapped by the Issei clone, and they find out that Loki was the one behind it and that he placed a curse on Issei and Rias to make their deepest fears worse. For Issei, the curse brought up his past with Rainier, and Issei gets told this on the roof of his house by Roswaisa, and then this is when he realized that he's still traumatized by Rainier. He just comes to that realization in one of the most underwhelming scenes. There was no tension leading up to this realization, there was no real build up leading up to this realization, and it's done in such an underwhelming way. And the biggest problem of them all is that Issei is the one to figure out that he's traumatized. It's just so much worse compared to the actual version we get in season 4. In season 4, Issei doesn't understand how much Rainier has been eating at his mind until the girls tell him. It's supposed to be a big moment of realization for him, it's supposed to be hidden to him. This scene works so well because it has emotional impact and it acts as a wake-up call for Issei. He's able to look within himself and tell everyone his deep insecurities, and it all just leads up to a beautiful moment between everyone. We don't get that here in season 3. Instead, we get a lackluster reveal and they just quickly move on to the next scene. It doesn't feel as important as it should because they're so focused on giving us that cute moment between our main characters. The fight between Issei and his clone is also really rushed and it just feels so lazy. This is the last fight of the season and it's Issei up against the strongest version of himself that we've seen up until this point. And Issei beats him with a single blast. They don't even try to give us something to be invested in. I'm not expecting anything crazy with this fight, but what they did here was just so lazy, and again it just felt rushed. They keep rushing to get us to that big moment between our two lovebirds. And then of course you have that random moment with Issei and Asuya at the beginning of the arc. This moment is built up so much during this episode. They're acting like Asuya is about to die if she tries to heal Issei. The amount of suspense built in the first 5 minutes of this episode makes you think Asuya is about to set off a nuclear bomb, but then you get to the moment of her healing him and it just looks like she's healing him normally. She also only spends like 30 seconds healing him, and then to add insult to injury, we get probably the most unnecessary and laughable use of fan service. This whole moment just felt so disappointing because it was so rushed over. The payoff just didn't live up to the hype, and it just feels like they're rushing to get to that heartfelt moment between Issei and Rias. They're trying so hard to get to the next moment. They're not putting any time into what's happening right now. You could take this moment between Issei and Asuya out and just have Issei wake up normally and nothing changes. That's how unimportant this scene feels because of the pacing. You probably didn't even notice, but during my intro I only talked about how the curse affected Rias. That's because the curse that's placed on Issei doesn't actually do anything, and it doesn't give us anything new or different. The curse is placed on Issei after his fight with Loki, and the only time we really get to see it in action is during the Juggernaut Drive scene. While he's going Juggernaut Drive, the curse makes him think of Rainier, who goes on to taunt him and only makes him go even more berserk. Issei being influenced by Rainier and her being the one to make him almost use up all of his lifespan is such a good moment and it's a great call. I've said this so many times, but the anime actually does do the Juggernaut Drive scene way better than the light novel, and this is an example of that, except you didn't need the curse to do this. Issei was already deeply traumatized by Rainier, and we see this before Loki is even mentioned. He's already battling himself deeply, so what does the curse add to this? If this was the first instance of Issei's trauma, and if this was the first time we see Rainier in Issei's mind, and the curse was used to enhance the trauma, I would understand, but it just doesn't do that. All it does is add an unnecessary element. The curse is supposed to prey on its victims' insecurities, and it does a good job at that, but we don't really see it enhancing anything. Issei was already shown to be traumatized before this, and he doesn't seem any more traumatized after this, so what was the point? This Juggernaut Drive scene with Rainier is great. It shows us how deep she has infiltrated his mind, but the scene works better when you don't know that Issei is feeling this because of a curse. Issei thinks Asuya is dead. At this point, he's failed to save her like 4 or 5 times. The last time he failed to save Asuya, he got brutally mocked for it by Rainier, and that's one of the reasons why she affected him so deeply in the first place. She crushed his spirit by not only killing Asuya, but by letting him know that he's a failure for letting her die. It's such an important moment for his character because it changed the way he felt about himself for the remainder of the series. So knowing that, and seeing that Issei failed to save Asuya again, why would Issei need a curse to infiltrate his mind and let him know that he's a failure? If you remove this curse from Issei, this scene would still work the exact same same way, and it would still be believable considering what happened last time Issei failed to save Asya. Of course he would have flashbacks of Rainier talking to him, especially since he's still traumatized. It just wasn't necessary to add this curse here in any way. It didn't actually give us anything new. Rias' story was a lot more interesting because it actually had significant plot implications. It was already established throughout the series that Rias was having problems with her confidence. All those moments of her zoning out and talking to herself aren't there for nothing. And then of course Loki places the curse on her. Now it doesn't actually give us anything different, but it does lead to her being vulnerable enough for Loki's Issei clone to mind control her. I actually like that scene too. Rias is insecure in her relationship with Issei because he won't stop calling her president, he won't make a move on her, and because she feels like he just doesn't understand how she feels. So when an Issei lookalike comes in and tells her everything she needs to hear to calm her insecurities, of course she's gonna fall for it. It makes sense and it's actually realistic. So that part of the story isn't bad, and the lead up to the final moment isn't bad either. I love the moment where everyone pours their heart out to Rias and that almost breaks her out of her mind control. I think the fight between her and Issei has some decent emotional value, and it does a great job at showing how much Issei loves her. All of that was done really well and it made sense. We got some nice moments and we truly got to see how important Rias is to the group. I like the story being told here with Issei and Rias' insecurities. It's built up throughout the series and it leads to a great moment between Issei and Rias. The arc is all about Issei's trauma and Rias' lack of confidence. These two things bounce off of each other and add tension to Rias and Issei's relationship. And of course it all leads to a big confrontation between the two, and then they make up and make out. Wait a minute. Issei's trauma and Rias' insecurity is being built throughout the series, and these two things bounce off of each other and add tension to their relationship, which then leads to a confrontation between the two, and then they make up and make out. It's literally just a copy of the clubroom scene. And now we've arrived at my biggest problem with this arc. It took me up until just this last rewatch to realize that they just copy and pasted the biggest conflict in season 4 into this season. And they did it for no reason. This moment in season 3 is the exact same as this moment in season 4. This arc single-handedly destroys all the credibility for the clubroom scene. In this moment in season 3, Rias says that she was feeling jealous because of how the other girls threw themselves at Issei and how he acts around them. In the sub, Rias says that she was feeling insecure in their relationship because Issei wouldn't stop calling her president, and that was making her question their relationship, especially since he refers to the other girls by their names. This makes sense with the story being told. I talked about the clubroom scene in my last video and I went over how good the build up to that scene was, and everything I said in that video can be applied here. But what was the point? It's the exact same thing as season 4. This entire arc was just pointless. It's pointless because it doesn't need to exist. TNK made the choice to go off script and create their own new story for season 3. They cut out the Sona rating game, they rearranged all the arcs, they completely changed all the fights. They made all these changes that give us a somewhat new and interesting take while still mostly following the canon, and it kind of works, but with this last arc they throw all of that out the window. If we were going to get this same problem and this same resolution later down the line, then what was the point of moving it forward? This arc is pointless. It has no meaning, it has no value, it adds nothing to the story. It actually makes the story worse because now Rias and Issei look bad. They make up in this arc. Issei acknowledges Rias' feelings about him, and I'm 99% sure that in the sub, that moment where Issei talks and you can't hear anything, that's supposed to be him saying her name. And also, let's not forget that Issei figured out that he's still traumatized by Rainier earlier in this arc. So Rias and Issei have come to a resolution and they essentially are fine now. Issei assures her that she has no reason to be insecure in their relationship, and Rias basically confesses to Issei while she's talking about her insecurities, and they kiss. So you know what this implies for the next season? This implies that Issei and Rias didn't learn their lesson and they have to do it again. Issei makes her feel secure in their relationship, and this implies that she ignores that and goes into season 4 with the exact same problem. It makes her look terrible. They share this beautiful moment where Rias learns to love herself, and then it's completely thrown out the window the second season 4 hits because, of course, season 4 has to tell the same story. And this same thing applies to Issei. He acknowledges that he's traumatized and he takes steps in the right direction by calling Rias by her name, and then we're back to square one the second season 4 hits. And of course, it's not season 4's fault. Season 4 has to tell this story again because there's no other story to tell. And that's my biggest problem with this arc. It makes Rias and Issei look bad because it makes it seem like they don't learn their lesson. Now, luckily, the author has already confirmed that these episodes aren't canon, and basically all of season 3 isn't canon. So season 4 isn't actually affected by this, but it feels like it is affected by it. And that's because when you're watching season 3, you're not really thinking that what you're watching isn't canon. So when they transition into like a completely new story for season 4, it just feels really weird and everything just kind of feels off. And it's all caused by the Loki's curse arc in season 3. Season 4 tries so hard to make up for the stuff that season 3 did wrong. They're trying to tell us about the stuff that was supposed to happen in season 3, but we didn't get to see it, so it just makes it kind of confusing. And it's especially confusing for the people who don't read the light novel. These people have to just believe that Rias and Sona had a rating game off screen. They have to believe that Issei learned how to spit fire off screen. They're telling us that Issei has already encountered the hero faction off screen. They have to believe Issei went through a whole trial with the Power Ranger devils off screen. There's so much just random stuff that happens off screen because they didn't want to tell the story in season 3. All these things add up and they make season 4 seem a lot worse than it should be. Because season 3 doesn't follow the canon, because season 3 wants to be different, season 4 has to also deal with those consequences. Sure, the episodes in the Loki's curse arc aren't necessarily bad episodes. Sure, there is a decent story being told, but at what cost? We're losing key details and key moments just so we can tell a story that hasn't even been fully fleshed out yet. It was just such a bad move and it makes no sense, and nobody asked for this. Nobody wants to see the club room scene twice. So once more, I have to ask, what was the point? And the answer is there is no point. There's no reason for this arc's existence. It adds nothing, and it only makes future events seem silly. It forces season 4 to correct the mistakes that they made in season 3. It rushes through important details by just dumping them onto us through conversations. And of course, the biggest sin of them all is that it completely deviates from the light novel, and it cuts out one of the best volumes just to move a story from later volumes forward. Again, thank God the author confirmed this season isn't canon, because this arc just adds nothing positive to the series, and this negative impact is felt heavily throughout the rest of the series. And the best part is that all of this could have been avoided if they would have just followed the light novel. And there goes that video. This wasn't originally going to be its own video, but once I rewatched the series and I wrote my club room scene video, I just had to talk about this Loki arc and a little bit of season 3 and how that kind of messes up season 4. I think this is probably the worst part of High School DxD. This is their biggest drop in quality. I got a few videos in the works, volume 9 review, I got every episode's ranked, I got a fanfic video in the works, so you can look forward to those, I guess. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.